Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and we'll resume where we left off Friday in our reading and discussion of the book The History of Romanism by John Dowling. We were about ready to conclude subsection 72 on page 315, or 316 rather. But before I begin where we left off, I'll refresh your memory what we were talking about. Recently, our discussion was held about the total annihilation of Beziers in southern France. This is the time when the papacy, Pope Innocent III, declared a crusade against the Protestants of southern France. And the Protestants were held up in two cities, in particular that we're speaking about, Beziers, or Béziers, if it's pronounced that way correctly. And the city was totally obliterated, and every man, woman, and child in the city were killed. There was no one left alive. And the only other city held up at this time was Carcassonne, and Carcassonne was full of Protestants. It was a heavily fortified city, and the Crusaders couldn't breach the walls, couldn't break into the city and kill everybody. And being frustrated, and Mary just wasn't turning out for them in Carcassonne, so they sent a deceiver to the city to speak to the Count of Beziers, who was held up in the city, the leader of the people. Roger was his name. And they enticed him with the promise of free passage to leave Carcassonne under protection and to go and visit directly with the legate, the papal legate, and to negotiate a peace. And then after the negotiations, free passage back into the city of Carcassonne. Well, when Roger visited the legate just placed him under arrest. In other words, violated his oath. And this is commensurate with the Roman Catholic doctrine that was established long, long ago in the Roman Catholic Church. Roman Catholics are not to keep faith with heretics. Roger was considered a Protestant, a heretic. And since Roman Catholic canon law demands that Catholics do not keep faith with Protestants, he was free to renege on his promise. And so Roger was put in prison. And it says, and concluding now, subsection 72, near the bottom of the subsection, it says, but appeals, remonstrances, or entreaties were of no avail. Roger was looked upon as a heretic, and it was already the doctrine of the Roman Catholic Church that no faith should be kept with heretics. In spite of his appeals, therefore, he was committed to the custody of the Duke of Burgundy, and, quote, having been thrown into prison, died soon thereafter, not without exciting strong suspicions of being poisoned, unquote. So he was placed into prison and immediately died, and it was suspected that he was poisoned. Now, concluding the subsection, it says, Pope Innocent III, who was the Pope at that time, indeed admits in one of his epistles that this young and brave Earl, or Count of Beziers, died of violent death, unquote. So, the Roman Catholics are not required to keep faith with heretics. They can promise you the moon. If they regard you a heretic, they are not bound to keep their oaths and promises. So if you're ever in a situation when persecution takes place, and it will take place, that a peace is offered, safe passage, or any other promise from the legate or any official of the Roman Catholic Church, you must know full well that Roman Catholics, under Roman Catholic canon law, can break any promise they make you because you're a heretic. All right. Make no peace with the whore of Rome. That's the message. Make no negotiation with the Roman Catholic Church. Now, subsection 73 on page 316 will continue now. He said, no sooner had the inhabitants of Carcassonne received the intelligence of the earl's confinement than they burst into tears and were seized with such terror that they thought of nothing but how to escape the danger that they were placed in. But blockaded as they were on all sides, and the trenches filled with men, that is, crusaders, all human probability of escape vanished from their eyes. A report, however, was circulated that there was a vault or a subterraneous passage somewhere in the city which led to the castle of Cabaret, a distance of about 3 leagues from Carcassonne, and that if the mouth or the entry thereof could be found, Providence had provided for them a way of escape. Okay, so they're frantically searching throughout the city of Carcassonne for this secret passageway. Now it says, all the inhabitants of the city, except those who kept watch upon the ramparts, immediately commenced the search, and success rewarded their labor. The entrance of the cavern was found, and at the beginning of the night they all began their journey through it, carrying with them only as much food as was deemed necessary to serve them for a few days. Quote, it was a dismal and sorrowful sight, says the historian, to witness their removal and departure, accompanied with sighs, tears, and lamentations at the thought of quitting their habitations and all their worldly possessions, and betaking themselves to the uncertain event of saving themselves by flight. In other words, they were all lamenting. They were held up in a secure city which the Crusaders could not breach, and yet eventually the blockade would have starved them all. And their leader had been taken and imprisoned and was now dead, and they had no hope but to flee the city. And so they found the entrance to the tunnel, and they began to proceed through it, leaving all of their worldly possessions behind. With only the hope of sustenance for 2 days' journey, they and all the people of the city made their passage through that tunnel to the castle. And it says, parents leading their children, and the more robust supporting decrepit older persons, and especially to hear the affecting lamentations of the women, unquote. They, however, arrived the following day at the castle, from whence they dispersed themselves through different parts of the country, some proceeding to Aragon, and some to Catalonia, and others to Toulouse, and the cities belonging to their party, wherever God in His providence opened the door for their admission. So they escaped. They made way through this tunnel, this passageway, to the castle, and then from there dispersed out into the countries that in the south of France, where the Albigensians lived. Now it said, the awful silence which reigned in the solitary city excited no little surprise on the following day among the pilgrims. At first, that is, the Crusaders, it says, at first they suspected a stratagem to draw them into an ambush. Okay? They noticed the silence in the city. The Crusaders outside the walls heard the silence in the city, and they thought they might be an attempt to draw them into the city to an ambush. It says, but on mounting the walls and entering the town, they cried out, quote, the Albigenses have fled, unquote. The legate issued a proclamation that no person should seize or carry off any of the plunder, that it should be carried to the great church of Carcassonne, whence it was disposed of for the benefit of the pilgrims, and the proceeds distributed among them in rewards according to their deserts. So here they found a ghost town. Nobody was there. All the property was left behind. And the legate, the Roman Catholic legate, stopped the pillage and took all of the properties out of the city to the local Roman Catholic Church, where the church dispensed the booty to the Crusaders. This is what happens to your property when Rome gets in control. She disperses it to whomever she will. Okay? The Pope says the earth is mine and the fullness thereof. And when heretics abandon their property, it's up to the Pope to disperse your property to Catholics. Okay? And we see this repeated all throughout history. One of the great inspiring offers made to the Crusaders to join these crusades was the promise of the booties of war. That Protestant properties, rich as they were, lands fully cultivated, bearing fruit, barns, houses, were all given to the Catholics. He says the limits of this work will not allow the detail of the sanguinary slaughter of the helpless Albigenses and the perfidious stratagems by which they were entrapped to their ruin by the bloody Simon de Montfort and the monks who conducted 2 or 3 equally destructive expeditions against the Albigensians in the few succeeding years till they were almost entirely exterminated. Okay, Simon de Montfort is one of the most recognizable names in terms of Protestant persecution. Simon de Montfort was a monster, and he loved to kill heretics. And he says 2 or 3 more instances of their ferocious cruelty and zeal on behalf of popery can only be mentioned. In the year 1210 A.D., Montfort caused Count Raymond VI to be again excommunicated when the unfortunate prince, overcome by his unrelenting persecution and from his superstition, attached a greater importance to the papal thunders than they deserved, burst into tears. The monks of Citeaux were meanwhile busily engaged in raising a fresh army of crusaders in the north of France, and no sooner was Montfort joined by them than he gave full scope to his cruelty. Attacking the castles in the Larengay and the Minerbois, he caused all such of their inhabitants as fell into his hands to be hanged on gibbets. Okay? So any heretic that fell into Montfort's hands were hanged. It says, having invested that of Brom and taken it by assault on the 3rd day, he selected more than 100 wretched inhabitants, and having torn out their eyes and cut off their noses, sent them under the guidance of a one-eyed man to the castle of Cabaret to intimate to the garrison of that fortress the fate which awaited them. Some of those fortresses he found deserted, and then sent out his soldiers to destroy the vines and the olive trees in the surrounding country. In other words, if they couldn't find any heretics, they destroyed their orchards. They destroyed their property, so that if they ever returned, they'd have no means of sustenance. Subsection 74 begins on page 317. He says, the castle of Minerbe, seated on a steep rock surrounded by precipices not far from Narbonne, was reputed to be the strongest place in the south of France. Guillard, its possessor, was vassal to the Viscounts of Carcassonne and one of the bravest knights of the province. In the month of June of 1210 A.D., the Crusaders appeared before his fortress. The inhabitants, many of whom had adopted the doctrines of the Albigenses, defended themselves with great valor for 7 weeks. Okay? So they found Protestants more Protestants, those who held the doctrines of the Albigenses, which was the Pope is the Antichrist, right? He says, but when, owing to the heat of the season, water began to fail, they desired to capitulate. And Guillard himself went to the camp of the Crusaders and settled with Montfort the conditions for the surrender of the place. They were proceeding to execute them when the Pope's legate, who had been absent, returned to the camp, and Montfort declared that the terms agreed upon could not be considered as binding until they received his assent. Okay, do you see another betrayal in the making right here? Quote, at these words, says Peter de Vaux-Charnay, the abbot was sorely grieved. He desired, in fact, that all the enemies of Christ, that is, the Protestants, should be put to death. But he would not take it upon himself to condemn them on account of his quality of monk or priest. Okay? So he said, he was basically saying that decision is for someone of a higher pay grade than me. I'm just a monk or a priest. Right? He wanted to kill all the Protestants. He just didn't feel himself high enough rank to make that decision. Now he thought, however, that he might stir up some quarrel during the negotiation, avail himself of this quarrel, to break the capitulation and cause all the inhabitants to be put to the sword. To this end, he required of Montfort on one part and to Guillard on the other the terms on which they agreed. Finding, just as he expected, some difference in the statements, Montfort declared in the name of the legate that the negotiations was broken off. Okay, so they found some pretense to break off this peace. He said the Lord of Minerby offered to accept the capitulation as drawn up by Montfort, one of the articles of which provided that the heretics themselves, if they became converts, in other words, convert to Roman Catholicism, should have their lives spared and be allowed to quit the castle or leave the castle and be free. And it says, when the capitulation was read in the council of war, Robert de Mauvoisin says, the monk of Vaux-Charnay, quote, a nobleman and entirely devoted to the Catholic Church, cried that the pilgrims would never consent to that, and that it was not to show mercy to the heretics, but to put them to death, that they had taken the cross. But Abbot Arnold replied, quote, be easy, for I believe that there will be very few converted. In this sanguinary hope, the legate was not disappointed. That's right. The Protestants, even when they knew they were going to be put to death, would not capitulate and would not join the Roman Catholic Church. He said the Crusaders took possession of the castle on the 22nd of July. They entered singing the Te Deum and proceeded by the crucifix and the standards of Montfort. The heretics were meanwhile assembled, the men of one house in one house and the women in another, and there on their knees, resigned to their fate, they prepared themselves by prayer for the worst that could befall them. The abbot of Vaux-Charnay, in fulfillment of the capitulation, began to preach to them the Catholic faith. But they interrupted him with the unanimous cry, quote, we will have none of your faith. We have renounced the Church of Rome. Your labor is in vain. For neither death nor life shall make us renounce the opinions that we have embraced. Unquote. That is, the Protestant opinions. The papacy is the Antichrist. The Roman Catholic Church is that whore that rides the scarlet-colored beast of Revelation chapter 17. We will not convert to the Roman Catholic Church. That's what they all said. Unanimous. They were all faced with death. and yet they would not capitulate to Rome. He continues, he said, the abbot then went into the assembly of women, but he found them equally resolute and still more enthusiastic in their declarations. Montfort also went to them both. He had previously caused a prodigious pile of dry wood to be made. Quote, "Be converted to the Roman Catholic faith," unquote, said he to the assembly of Albigensians, quote, "or mount this pile," unquote. In other words, be converted to the Roman Catholic Church or climb onto this pile of dry, burning wood. None of them wavered. Fire was set to the wood, and the pile was soon wrapped in one tremendous blaze. The heretics were then taken to the spot where, after commending their souls to the God in whose cause they suffered martyrdom, they voluntarily threw themselves into the flames to the number of more than 140. 140 people, God-fearing, Bible-believing Christians, rather than to convert to the Roman Catholic Church, simply mounted the fire. They threw themselves into the fire. Who would even imagine to see that kind of faith in our day? The Bible speaks of these holy people. They love not their lives unto death. And Rome considers their destruction a victory and a proof that the Roman Catholic Church is the one holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic faith outside of which there is no salvation. When they killed these godly people, they thought they were doing God's service. And to think that the churches that once called themselves Protestants in this country are seeking to unify with that Roman Catholic Church is a horror that can't even be articulated. And it all began, this road back to Rome all began in the early 1800s when they began to teach futurism in the Protestant seminaries. In the early 1800s and then in the middle 1900s, futurism had become the orthodox teaching in the Protestant churches, thereby making Vatican Council II a reality. And the ecumenical movement has reclaimed the Protestant faith. On the things that they still differ, they set those things aside to give their power and strength unto the beast. And what does that bode for those who still hold the Protestant faith? That the Pope is the Antichrist? Persecution. Their betrayal of Christ and joining the ecumenical movement has put all true Bible-believing Protestants once again in grave danger of persecution. Most of the Protestant world has capitulated to Rome, leaving God's last holdouts an extreme minority in this country and around the world. And persecution will result. We'll return right after the break. You're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net. If you'd like to get a copy of this program, you may subscribe at FirstAmendmentRadio.com for only $45 a month, and you'll receive an MP3 CD weekly of all of our programs. As a bonus, we'll send you a password for our audio archives online. That's a $15 value. Or you may request any month of any program on one MP3 CD for a minimum donation of only $25, or any single program on MP3 CD or CD for only $15. You may do all of this online at FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Just follow the instructions to make a donation or subscribe. You may also adopt an hour of your favorite program. Please don't forget that most of the programs on FirstAmendmentRadio.com are listener-supported. Thank you from all of us here at FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased. It has been stolen, there's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit DiscountGoldandSilverTrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit DiscountGoldandSilverTrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio, and if you'd like to support this program and keep it on the air, please support First Amendment Radio. If you would like to contact me by snail mail, my snail mail address is Tom Fress, P.O. Box 304, Jefferson, Iowa, 50129. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. The website is inquisitionupdate.org. Now we'll continue with subsection 75 beginning on page 319. In May of 1211 A.D., Simon de Montfort succeeded after a hard siege in taking Lavaur, another French city of Albigensians. It said, when the breach in the wall was effected, and the Crusaders were about to enter and begin the massacre, according to their usual custom, the bishops, the abbot of Cordoue, and all the priests, clothed in their pontifical habits, giving themselves up to the joy of seeing the carnage, began to sing the Veni Creator. Okay, another diabolical musical rendition of the Roman Catholic Church. They sing Te Deums. They sing these Roman Catholic hymns when they're about to kill God's people. He continues, he says, the knights mounted the breach. Resistance was impossible, and the only care of Simon de Montfort was to prevent the Crusaders from instantly falling upon the inhabitants, and to beseech them rather to make prisoners, that the priests of the living God might not be deprived of their promised joy. Okay? A little change of strategy here. Rather than just falling on the city and demolishing and killing every single man, woman, and child, they were ordered this time to take prisoners, so as not to deprive the priests of their part of this slaughter. Quote, very soon, says their own monkish historian, they dragged out of the castle Amory, Lord of Montreal, and other knights to the number of 80. The noble Count Montfort immediately ordered them to be hanged upon the gallows. But as soon as Amory, the stoutest among them, was hanged, the gallows fell, for in their great haste they had not fixed it well in the earth. The Count, seeing that this would produce great delay, ordered the rest to be massacred, and the pilgrims, receiving the order with the greatest avidity, very soon massacred them all on the spot. The lady of the castle, who was sister of Amory, and an execrable heretic, was by the count's order thrown into a pit, which was then filled up with stones. Buried alive in a pit, covered up with stones. Afterward, our pilgrims collected the innumerable heretics which the castle contained and burned them with the utmost joy." Unquote. Immediately on the taking of Laval, open hostilities commenced between Simon de Montfort and the Count of Toulouse. The first place belonging to this count, before which the Crusaders presented themselves, was the castle of Montjoy, which, being abandoned, was set fire to and then razed from top to bottom by the soldiers of the church. The castle of Casoro afforded them little more satisfaction, as it furnished human victims for their sacrifices. It was surrendered on capitulation, and, quote, "the pilgrims, seizing near 60 heretics, burned them with infinite joy," unquote. This is the language invariably employed by the Petrus Valensis, the monkish historian, who was the witness and the panegyrist of the crusade. It was natural that Count Raymond should feel reluctant to countenance and aid these cruel persecutors of his subjects and friends. He continued, therefore, as long as he lived, to be an object of popish persecution. He was nevertheless most scrupulous in the observance of all the practices of the Catholic religion, so that when under excommunication he would continue for a long time on his knees in prayer at the doors of the churches, which he durst never enter. Hence it is evident that his offense was not heresy on his own part, but simply his refusal to engage in the cruel massacres and extermination of his subjects at the command of the spiritual tyrants of the Roman Catholic Church. So Raymond VI was a Roman Catholic. He was a subject of the Pope, but he could not deny the holy and righteous nature of the Albigensian people that made up almost the majority of southern France. Languedoc, the whole territory. And though he remained a papist till the day he died, he never cooperated with Rome to kill God's people. But I think you'll find in history that Raymond VI is a rarity. Most Roman Catholics kill heretics with great joy. Quoting from subsection 77 on page 320, quote, "The Crusades against the Albigenses present one of those occasions by which the rights claimed by the Roman Catholic Church toward heretics may be most fully and accurately ascertained. They were her exclusive and deliberate act." Exclusive and deliberate. Okay? The Roman Catholic Church exclusively. The blame can't be placed on anyone other than the Roman Catholic Church. And her acts were deliberate. He says the Church of Rome had been then, according to its own principles, established nearly 1,200 years. It professed to have been endowed with miraculous powers and to be guided by the teachings of the infallible Spirit of God. All the temporal authorities, that is, all the governments of the world, had submitted to its domination and were ready to execute its orders. If, therefore, there is any period in which we should seek for its genuine and authentic principles, it must be under the unclouded dominion of Pope Innocent III. Nor can the opponents of all Reformation possibly desire anything more than to restore that golden age of the church. Okay? The opponents of the Reformation is the Roman Catholic Church. And there's nothing in this world that they could more possibly desire than to restore the golden age of the Roman Catholic Church as it existed under Pope Innocent III. What the author is telling you is that at the first opportunity, the Roman Catholic Church will restore all of these horrors. Persecution in the name of God. It says, should they say that civilization and philosophy, having then made but little progress, we are to charge the cruelties which were committed against the heretics to the ignorance and barbarism of the times, we would reply that all these cruelties were prompted, encouraged, and sanctioned by Rome itself, and that an infallible church cannot require the lights of philosophy to instruct her in her duties toward heretics. To an impartial inquirer, it would seem rather strange that, under the spiritual illumination afforded by the Church to the nations, heresies should have arisen, and that with all the powers of heaven and earth on its side, the Church could not trust itself in the field of reason and argument against them. But certain it is that heresies did arise, and that the Church of Rome felt itself called upon to show to that age and to all succeeding ages the full extent of the power with which it was invested by heaven for their suppression and extirpation. The dogma on which all these transactions were founded is, quote, that the Church possesses the right to extirpate heresy, unquote, and to use all the means which she may judge necessary for that purpose. It was on this dogma that Antichrist Pope Innocent III and his legates preached the crusade against the heretics and promised to those engaged in it the full remission of all their sins. It was on this dogma that they excommunicated the civil powers by whom they were and were supposed to be protected, and disposed of their dominions to those who assisted in this spiritual warfare. Quote, this dogma was repeatedly avowed by providential councils and finally ratified by a general council, the Fourth Lateran Council. You've heard me talk over and over and over again about the Third and Fourth Lateran Councils. At the Third Lateran Council, it said it was no crime to kill a heretic. The Fourth Lateran Council, it declared that it was a meritorious work to kill a heretic. Now, beginning with the quote again, he says, quote, this dogma was repeatedly avowed by providential councils and finally ratified by a general council, the Fourth of Lateran. It was received by the tacit, nay, by the cordial and triumphant assent of the universal church, and had also the sanction of the civil authorities who received from the church the spoils of the deposed and the persecuted princes. Okay? Quote, we can therefore conceive of nothing which should be still necessary to constitute this dogma an article of the Roman Catholic faith, and hold ourselves justified in considering the Church of Rome to claim, as of divine authority, the right to extirpate heresy, and for this purpose, if she judge it necessary, to extirpate the heretics. Nor has this principle, which was evidently avowed and acted upon in the period of these crusades, ever been renounced by any authentic or official act of that church. On the contrary, the Church, the Roman Catholic Church, has, during the 600 years which followed these events, invariably, as far as occasions have served, avowed the same principles and perpetrated or stimulated the same deeds. What's this author telling you? Nothing has changed. Rome has never renounced these horrors. Rome still perpetrates, and if she cannot perpetrate these atrocities, she stimulates others to do it. Now, this perfectly explains World War I and World War II and every war since then. The Vatican is behind the wars. When the nations of the world engage in conflict, the secret purpose behind these conflicts is to kill the quote-unquote heretics of every stripe. Rome has never renounced her divine right authority to extirpate and to annihilate heresies. And if Rome calls you a heretic, you are in her gun sights. And it will be the civil powers of the world that will exterminate you in the process of the wars. He said, as soon as the wars against the Albigensians were terminated, the Inquisition was brought into full and constant action, and was always been encouraged and supported by the Roman Catholic Church to the utmost of its power in every place where it could obtain an establishment. So the Inquisition is a permanent installation in the Roman Catholic Church. That's the truth. And it's the governments of the world that do the inquisiting. You beginning to understand what purpose serves all these wars? And they're all fought at our expense. How many Protestants have dutifully enlisted in the military and gone traipsing off to a papal crusade somewhere around the world, and they were never told that the advantages that they were gaining were not for the extension of democracy or freedom or liberty, but to bind the whole world under papal jurisdiction? How many Protestants, yea, how many Catholics would enlist in the military if they knew that they were going to war to extend the power, the temporal and the spiritual powers of the popes? How many of your family members have been lost in these papal proxy wars? He said the civil authorities, finding by experience that some of the claims of the Roman Catholic Church were more prejudicial than useful to themselves, have denied to it the right of deposing sovereigns or of freeing subjects from their allegiance. But the Church itself has never generally or explicitly renounced this claim, and long after the Reformation in Germany continued to exercise it. Okay? The Reformation in Germany began about 502 years ago, 1517. And this is when the kings of the earth began to rebel against the papacy, but the papacy never withdrew its claim of divine right to rule over the kings of the earth. He continues, he says, and notwithstanding the professions made by modern Catholics, history does not furnish an instance of any body of the profession interposing its protest against the persecution of heretics by the Church of Rome. History does not furnish an instance of any body of the profession interposing its protest against the persecution of heretics by the Church of Rome. Persecution is a permanent indelible fixture in the Roman Catholic Church. History cannot provide one example where Rome has ceased to persecute. Does this cause you pause? What about your next door neighbor, a Roman Catholic? You share Sunday evening dinners with them, cookouts, camping. Lovely people, close personal friends, praying with one another. Do you know, at the word of the Pope, that Roman Catholic next door to you could be your worst enemy? Just from a word from the Pope. If they consider you Protestant, if they consider you a Protestant, they consider you a heretic. And they're happy to live in peace with you until an opportunity arises where they can exercise their Roman Catholic prerogative. And history is voluminous with example after example after example of how they'll turn on the heretics at the moment the order is issued from Rome. Subsection 78, quote, another right most certainly claimed and exercised by the Roman See throughout its whole history is that of dissolving oaths. History, that is particularly Sismondi's History of the Italian Republics, furnishes instances of this as a recognized, undisputed, and everyday practice in almost every pontificate. One instance may serve for an illustration among the multitude of others. There were certain reforms in the pontifical government which were required by the leading persons in the Church, but which they never could obtain from the popes themselves. The cardinals, therefore, when they were going to elect a new pope, were accustomed to bind themselves by the most solemn of oaths that whoever of them should be elected would grant those reforms. And invariably, as soon as the Pope was chosen, he released himself from this oath on the ground of its being contrary to the interests of the Church. Okay? So what do you learn from this? That there is no oath that a Roman Catholic prelate can take that he can't exonerate himself from, if he can style it as somehow contrary to the interests of the Roman Catholic Church. He says the power of releasing from the obligation of oaths was also extended during these crusades, especially to freeing the subjects of heretical princes from their oaths of allegiance, and it was especially sanctioned by the Council of the Lateran. This practice has, however, become so obnoxious in modern times that the rite has been indignantly disowned by most of the advocates of the Roman Catholic Church. Whatever may be the opinions of many private individuals or bodies in the Church of Rome, we doubt their authority to make such declarations as members of a church which prohibits the right of private judgment where the Church has determined, unquote. Just another way of telling you, nothing has changed. There was a time in history when it became too obnoxious for the Roman Catholic Church to maintain this order, this dogma, that you are not bound by any oaths. But when opportunity presents itself, it becomes the dogma of the Roman Catholic Church. Any Roman Catholic can take any oath in front of as many witnesses and cameras as the law will allow, and yet they are not bound by these oaths. any oath that a Roman Catholic takes that presents an occasion where it might be disadvantageous to the Roman Catholic Church, the oath is null and void. And we've seen examples just in the reading this morning of just how flimsy their oaths are. Roger, the Count of Béziers, was offered free passage to and from the legate's office. But the Pope but the legate put him under arrest as soon as he entered his domains. You don't have to keep faith with heretics. That's the dogma of the Roman Catholic Church. So what good is there to sign a peace or an armistice with the Roman Catholic Church when they don't have to keep their oath? And what does it mean when a Roman Catholic who pretends to be evangelical stands before the world and declares the oath of presidency of the United States? It isn't worth the breath it took to take the oath if that oath is in any way a disadvantage to the Roman Catholic Church. And this is precisely why all of our politicians betray us, no matter who they are. It's time for us to wake up.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on satellite, internet, or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.